What is up, everyone? Nintern here. So the season has really kicked off, and we're starting to get into Mythic Plus. Um, I am actually playing the Void Scarred Cleave caster build in this video. Which basically means that, I don't have the hunt, but I have all my other fun Void Scarred stuff. And I mean, Devour is really strong in general, so you're going to perform well, I want to say, like, almost regardless of build. But there is, like, a point where there are some noticeable gains from playing, like, a Void Scarred build. Mostly where I've been seeing the benefit is on bosses. Because the build in question, it sims about, like, 2% ahead of the Annihilator build for me. And even though that's like only 2%, I just really feel it on bosses. I feel like my single target on bosses is a lot higher when I'm playing this build. Mostly just because of the amount of reap that you do. You know, kind of in general. But as a whole, I think basically once you get out of that 12 range, you probably are going to want to play Annihilator. But some of the things I like about this build as well is Hungering Slash feels good. And I am interested to see, because in my last video, we kind of talked about like the 12.0.5 changes. And those changes, I don't think they're particularly good for Void Scarred. We kind of just have to see where things land and what other changes they choose to make. Because Flamebound's not getting buffed, Hungering Slash isn't getting buffed, Soulforged Blades isn't getting buffed. So what I really want to see is how, because the problem is still talent budget, right? Like, I can't get my Apex, Eradicate, all the melee stuff, and like Soul Glutton. I can't get all of those things at the same time, So it's really a balancing act, because the collapsing star becomes so bad, without the Apex, and like you need Eradicate for AoE. So it really becomes a question of like, well, what do I give up? And if there is a world where, if there's really a world where you drop Eradicate for AoE, like, maybe that's fine, but it's not. Like, it's not fine. Even with Burning Blades swapping to Hungering Slash, I am just really curious to see how that ends up, and I'll be sure to do some testing and kind of give a good debrief on that stuff. But for Windrunner Spire specifically, I would say this is one of my more favored dungeons so far. I've done all the dungeons, and I'm working on like getting some. I think I'm like 3150 right now for IO. And Windrunner doesn't. I mean, it's not really that bad. The worst, like the hardest boss in here is Emberdawn by like a lot. Emberdawn just does so much damage. And frankly, I don't really think the other bosses do enough to like care all that much. And like, I mean, Kroluk has like ads and like there's a lot of damage there, but Emberdawn is just so much damage all the time. Derelict Duo doesn't really do that much. And Restless Heart is kind of the same thing, as long as you know what to do with the mechanics, because that's more of a knowledge fight. But Devour is really strong. Something I've been noticing as well in this season so far is, since Brewmaster is such a strong tank, Brewmaster is everywhere. And I mean, this is just because most of my push keys have been pugged. I don't have like a dedicated team or anything like that to do keys with, so I'm kind of out in the world pugging keys. And the amount of comps that are just purely fizz comps And not, I mean, obviously there's the whole like, oh, I don't get invited to anything. There's 1,000 people applying for every key, so I mean, you're not going to get into every key, and it might take a little bit. But I've seen so many, I mean, Brewmaster's everywhere, but Brewmaster and Mistweaver in the same key, and they only take, you know, physical damage, and I just think it's really interesting to see how that's kind of developed, because I do think that the comp of, like, at least the DPS comp of, you know, Devour with a Mage and an Aug Evoker, or I mean even a Dev Evoker, but Aug Evoker is really strong right now. I think that DPS trio is incredibly strong. I think that's a super, super strong comp. And if you want to throw a melee DPS in there, you could replace, you know, the Aug Evoker with like an Unholy Decay or something. And, you know, you're basically in the same spot, and Unholy is really strong, and it does a lot of magic damage. It's not going to benefit from the intellect, but, you know, if that's what you want to do. Or you could really sub out the Mage for a DK as well. The DK is not going to give you any damage benefit, so you can kind of slot him anywhere. But we're coming up on Ember Dawn here. And Ember Dawn, I don't know, I think it just needs like a 20% damage nerf or something, because I think there's a point where, and especially for playing, because I have an Evoker in this key as well, like being 25 yards on this boss, yeah, most of the time you're fine, but if your tank for like whatever reason is just like, hey, I'm gonna take the boss to the other side of the room, and you have the circle and you've already gone to your side, you're basically screwed at that point, which is not super fun. But as a whole, I mean, the boss, I think the main thing what they're doing with these bosses this season is, since there's no more weak auras, the bosses, and this might just be because we don't have weak auras anymore, and they might have already been being designed like this, but the bosses are so, I do, like, almost classic level of, I do 2 things, and then there's your fight. Like Ember Dawn, for example, there's the puddles, and then the intermission phase with the wind and the tornadoes, and then there's the whole fight. Which, granted, it is a dungeon, and, you know, like, you want your dungeon boss to only take, like, 2 minutes or whatever. So, I mean, you're also doing, you know, 4 bosses in such a short time period that it also just makes sense to not have the bosses do a ton, just because they're not going to take that long anyway. But kind of circling back to Devour in general, just in any key, the part, and it's part of the reason I like Void Scarred so much in these keys as well, is that even at 13s, assuming no one dies, because there's been a lot of dying in the early season, people not knowing mechanics and stuff. But if no one's dying and you have a good group, like a really good pumper group, you, more than often than not, I don't think you get the full value out of Annihilator. I just don't think you do. At least for like early pulls especially. And there's the whole argument of taking like Tempered Soul. I'm not taking Tempered Soul yet. I'm not going to take Tempered Soul until 12:05 when we're kind of forced to. So that's something that, like, I'm not like too concerned about, because I can get, you know, 250 souls pretty quickly, because in this build I'm not playing Soul Glutton either. I am playing Emptiness, which I do think is better. I mean, it is just better, the drain rate and all that fun stuff in general. But for Void Scarred, I never thought I would be saying this either, but I'm a big fan of improved soul rending. Mostly because I think it's the reason why I like it more for Devourer than for Havoc, is that when I'm playing Devourer, and especially with these dungeons starting at 13 and up, you have so many times where I'm just going to get chunked for 80% of my health. But if I lob a Collapsing Star and I have 10% leash and then 2% from the talent, and then meta I'm at 4%, 14% total. and I throw out a C-Star, I'm back at full HP. Like 99% of the time, I am instantly back to full HP. Just from healing myself. And it... Because set fire to the pain, I mean, it's not a huge defensive boost. It's good. But it also is... And I do die here. But, it's... I think since we're a caster, especially as well, and especially as we go into 12.0.5, where Soul Immolation heals you for a good chunk of your health over a few seconds, I think we're much better suited to kind of going into this rot-resistant defensive style that we already kind of have, obviously, but I think the Leech is nice, and you're still able to take Avoidance enchants, too. As long as you're not taking Speed enchants, like, you are totally in the clear. Because, I mean, the last thing we need is more speed. But, I mean, Avoidance or Leech, like, you can really go either way and be totally content. But, kind of circling back to the 12.0.5 stuff and kind of how it's going to affect the season going forward, is the biggest advice I can give is, while I'm playing Voidscarred in this video, and I've really, I mean, if you ask anybody kind of prominent in the Demon Hunter Devourer community, I am probably the biggest Voidscarred glazer on the planet. It's my preferred way to play the spec, especially as, like, and this is something I'm kind of considering right now too with the channel in general, is, you know, I really have an itch to be back in Melee. I love Devour, but as a player, I just feel like I belong in Melee a lot of the time. And I don't know if Havoc's kind of what I want from that this season. So be sure to check out my Discord, because there is currently a poll up for the next... I don't know when this video is going to go up exactly, but it should be up by the time this is uploaded, and I can extend the poll, I think, if I need to. Of kind of, would you want to see other specs that that I'm personally interested in? I'm not going to make content for a spec that I'm not interested in myself, because I think that's a disservice to you as a viewer. I would much rather you get content from me for specs and classes and content that I'm passionate about. That's why I'm not going to make PvP stuff. I'm not passionate about PvP. I get 1800 every season for the transmog, and I get out. Like, that's about where that ends. So be sure to go to my Discord. That poll is going to be in there in the announcements channel, and be sure to check that out. But for the Derelict Duo, this might actually be one of my favorite bosses of the season. And I think part of that is because there really isn't anything going on here. And there's most of the damage going on in this fight. I mean, a lot of it is avoidable damage. You get ticked by the puddle like once. But, I mean, you just kite the ad, and then you just get to have this fun kind of 2-target cleave fight, which is something we're good at. And something you'll notice I do in this dungeon, and you'll probably see it in more dungeon content that I make, is in the Voidscarred caster build, you more often than not don't want to press Hungering Slash or Reaper's Toll, for that matter, I mean, if it's not going to trigger a Void Surge. And I mean, that's because we're not taking anything that's amping those abilities, and they're already not very good as it is. But as soon as you get to that 2-target, it is totally worth it to just rip that stuff. It's really, there's a huge disparity, I guess is what I want to say, between 1 and 2 target for these abilities. And to me, it's kind of what makes it far more interesting to play than Annihilator. While I do like Annihilator, like, Annihilator doesn't care that much about Reap unless it's for Void's Fall proc still. And it's much more traditional caster in that sense. Whereas Voidscarred, I think, and I've said this I'm sure a million times at this point on this channel, but I think there's just so much variety in how it can kind of be played that it's just far more interactive for me. And I think when it's played well, it can really just blast. And I mean, it's totally competitive with Annihilator. You do lose AoE by playing Void Scar over Annihilator. I think it's like 7%. Between Annihilator and the Void Scar caster cleave build that I am playing currently. And a big part of that is because of Void Scar's kind of talent restrictions. Because if you look at the trees, which you can find all these, I'll put the builds in the description, as well as they are in my Demon Hunter guide in the Fellhammer Discord as well. But in the Annihilator build, it gets to take Demonic Instinct, which means that it gets to, and you'll see I just like full healed myself from an Eradicate right there. But it gets to take Demonic Instinct, which is 20%, because that build doesn't even take Hungering Slash, but it takes that for the 20% Void Ray damage. And those 2 points for the Void Scar build, you know, they're going into, it needs second helping for the second charge of Reap. It needs, you know, I grab Hungering Slash too. And I think, I mean, full melee builds, they work, they exist, but they don't take Apex. And I think if Blizzard wants Void Scar to be, I think, what it's intended to be, which is that melee hybrid that, you know, they kind of talked about early on in the beta and alpha. The spec totally, I mean, I don't even think you need to change what the talents do. They just need positioning changes, and then the 2-pointers need to become 1-pointers, and then we're cooking. Or at the very least, I would like enough uptime on Hungering Slash to be able to replace Eradicate if I want to. And what I mean by that is, Eradicate is like, I don't know, off the top of my head, like 20 to 30% of your damage in a key, give or take. Which is a lot. That's a lot of your damage is just AoE Reap. Which is fine. But if I want to play a melee build that also wants collapsing star damage, the best I can do without just like actively throwing my key is by playing, you know, kind of what I'm playing here. Because if I get to the hunt and I also want to get Emptiness and my Apex, I don't get to take Eradicate anymore. And I'm just going to lose so much of my damage for Hungering Slash, which isn't very good to begin with. So I think that's something that I really wish they would consider. It's not going to happen at 12.0.5 patch, but hopefully in like a season 2 that might happen. But I don't say that in a disparaging way, because I am still really happy with Devour as it is. So you'll see Commander Krolak here. My big gripe with Commander Krolak, I think it's a fine fight. I'm a big fan of intermittent ad spawn fights, especially for specs that can kind of play around that, like Devour totally can if your meta is up. My problem with Commander Krolak is that he is literally immune to damage. I think it's like a 99% damage reduction while the ads are up. I think that's super, super lame, and I don't know why it exists to begin with. Because if he's going to be immune, then make his Bladestorm hit the ads. Because, I mean, if there's one ad up, or I mean even 3, I mean, if there's enough that I can just cleave off to the boss, we should be being rewarded for strategically playing around Bladestorm is kind of what I'm getting at here. And a big thing you'll see from me, too, on this fight, and just on the bosses in general, I'm basically pressing Reap on cooldown. Occasionally I'll wait for that 4th soul, but if I Void Ray into a C-Star into a Reap, I'm just gonna Reap twice, because those soul fragments that spawn from the C-Star, those are gonna get more often than not added to my second Reap there. And Reap spam in general, we're kind of finding is just a DPS increase. But I'm doing pretty competitive damage here. I mean, it's kind of hard to tell with the Aug Evoker, but I mean, we're way ahead of time on this key. and this is just kind of a chill 13 key, but um, I'm having a lot of fun. I mean, life's been pretty busy lately, so I mean, I haven't as much time to kind of play and make content like I wanted, but I'm hoping to kind of get back in the swing of things, try to get back into that rhythm of content that I kind of had a few months ago. And I'm kind of I kind of want to test the waters with not making videos specifically targeted at every single spec, because I don't think, I mean, granted, I'm not interested in every single spec, but I don't want to be, I'll rephrase. There's the term one trick pony, which I don't have a problem being with Devour. I really love Devour. I've said this enough. But I guess what I'm kind of wanting to be is a two-trick pony. I really think I would enjoy, and I think it would spice things up, not just for me, but for, everyone watching, to kind of cover two different specs. Not necessarily both Demon Hunter specs, because, I mean, I like Havoc, but I really think I would like to have, to kind of bridge two classes together almost in terms of making content for. Obviously that's going to be two different audiences, but I think that would be really interesting to see, and I'd really like to just test the waters with that and see how that turns out. But we killed Krolek. I'm also a big fan of kind of boss rush bosses, and I guess what I mean by that is, I think Necrotic Wake is a really good example. I mean, it's not, but I feel like it is. Of like, okay, so you're in Necrotic Wake, yeah, there's a bunch of trash, and then the first boss, and then you go to the trash, and then you go to the second boss. But after the second boss, it just feels very boom, boom, boom. Like, there's not a ton of trash in that Necropolis and Necrotic Wake, if people remember Necrotic Wake. But I mean, after that third boss in there, you're instantly at the last boss, and I think that just feels good because you're kind of in that home stretch. And I had meta pretty early in this fight because we haven't even lusted yet, and I mean, I am just kind of ripping damage, and that's kind of why I like, I don't know, it's less ramp up time. And dude, if Cull in meta crits, that thing does insane amounts of damage. That's thing, like, if you have a crit Cull with like Moment of Craving, like, that's doing as much damage as a Collapsing Star, and that just feels really good to me. And that's kind of why I think the 12.0.5 changes are so interesting, is that I mean, I don't know if that's gonna like happen anymore, because they're kind of doing away with the like out of meta buffs in favor of like they're adding a Collapsing Star tuning knob, which I do think is good, but it doesn't solve the problem I've kind of been talking about in this video of, if I'm playing a melee build, I can't do all of these things at the same time, right? You're making me choose. Whereas if I'm playing Annihilator, I don't have to choose, because melee talents are so bad that Annihilator can just take everything and it doesn't have to think about its talent choices there. And I mean, I've ran these sims a bunch of times, and it's just, I've tried to make it work, and it just is worse than just like playing Voidscar Caster Cleat even. But it's a build that I would definitely try out in dungeons if you haven't, if you kind of want to spice things up. I would say if you're kind of in that 17 range, I think most really high push key players are in right now. 17, I think the highest Devourer, I believe they're a Chinese player, and I think they just have all 18s timed. And they're like 30, or that might be the highest NA, I'm not sure. But if you're in that range, I would probably stick to Annihilator simply because of its damage profile, and when you're at that high of a key, we've left the range of like that upfront burst from Voidscar like really mattering, and you'd rather just play the build that does more raw damage over the course of time. And you'll see right there what I did is, it's not something you want to plan around because it's so inconsistent to plan around, but just pressing meta to immune a mechanic can kind of save you every once in a while, but it's not something you should like actively be trying to do, because you're just going to probably hurt your damage that way. But that dungeon has wrapped up, and be sure to like and subscribe to this video. We are going to have a lot more Mythic Plus content coming soon, and be sure to check out all the links in the description, as well as I will be putting the build in the description as well. But I hope everyone has a good night.